I grew up in the 1960s watching the original version of Jeopardy! For those of you who are too young to remember it, the show, taped in New York, had Art Fleming as the host, and the values of the clues ran from $10 to a whopping 100. In my childhood fantasy, it was shortly after my 18th birthday, and I was being congratulated on being the youngest ever 5-time undefeated champion for correctly saying, "Who was Bucephalus?" in answer to a question about Alexander the Great's horse. Fantasies don't always work out the way you expect them to, and the original Jeopardy went off the air about a year and a half before I turned 18 and would have been eligible. But as you know, the show came back, and I was living in Los Angeles. One day, in the Sunday LA Times, I saw an ad for Jeopardy contestants wanted, especially women. I was on the phone first thing the next morning. It took me 4 hours to get through, but I ended up with an appointment to go and try out that Friday. I left myself 3 hours for the 45-minute drive to Hollywood. I tried to fill in the time in between by drinking coffee, but the butterflies in my stomach quickly turned into vampire bats. And after a visit to the most disgusting ladies' room on Sunset Boulevard, I decided it was best to just drive to the studio. I spent the time while we waited to go in talking with other prospective contestants, and I learned that a surprising number of people are willing to travel all the way to Southern California just to try out for a game show. When we got in, the two contestant coordinators, Glenn and Suzanne, explained the tryout process. We filled out lots of paperwork, and then we went through a 50-question general knowledge quiz. There was a videotape with Alex Trebek reading the questions, and we wrote down our answers, not in the form of a question. I thought I'd done reasonably well, though I did confuse Diogenes and Demosthenes, gave the Navy a shark as their mascot rather than a goat, and married off Gwen Verdon to Gene Kelly because the only other male dancer I could think of was Ben Vereen, and he seemed really unlikely. While we waited for the quiz to be graded, they played an episode of Jeopardy, and everybody called out the answers, just like we do in our living rooms. Finally, they came back in, and out of 100 people, 19 of us had passed the test and got to play a mock game. For that, the clues were written on big pieces of cardboard, and we were given handbells to ring in with. When it was my turn to play, I couldn't remember that the new capital of the reunified Vietnam was Hanoi, and I said Ho Chi Minh City instead. But apparently correct answers were less important than showing some energy and enthusiasm. The person who never spoke above a whisper and the one who couldn't remember to answer in the form of a question were quickly dismissed. Finally, there were 7 of us left, and we got to go through what was called the personality interview. For this, we had to write down 5 fun facts about ourselves on a piece of paper, and then get up and talk for 1 minute. I said, "My name is Miriam Nadel. I'm originally from Island Park, New York. I work as an aerospace engineer for a company that gives advice to the Air Force. Occasionally, they even take my advice. My hobby is whitewater rafting, which means I spend a lot of time swimming in California rivers. If I win a lot of money, I'll pay off my student loans and maybe make a down payment on a house." They laughed at the right places, so I thought I'd done reasonably well. But they also told us that we might not get called for several months. Out-of-towners would get 1 month notice, locals would get 2 weeks. So I was rather startled on that Monday when my secretary announced that I had a call from Suzanne from Jeopardy! It seemed that somebody had gotten disqualified for having been on another game show within the past year, and they needed a local woman as a last-minute replacement. So would I be available to tape tomorrow? So, well, of course I was available. This was Jeopardy! After all. I quickly went down and rearranged a business trip that I was scheduled to leave on, and endured the rest of the day with all of my colleagues asking me if I was now going to be a TV star. When I arrived at the studio on Tuesday, it was easy to tell who my fellow contestants were. Because you see, we'd been instructed on what to wear, no black, white, or busy prints, and we also had to bring along 2 changes of clothes because they film an entire week at a time, and they don't want you to wear the same clothes to make it look like they're actually filming things on separate days. We went through even more paperwork, including having to designate a charity for any winnings over $75,000. They've changed that rule since then. And we had to prove lots of things about our eligibility, including showing our Social Security cards. We also got a lot of lectures about rules, and particularly about security. The only people you're allowed to talk to are the contestant coordinators and the other contestants. So when people ask me what Alex Trebek is really like, I can honestly answer, I have no idea. Finally, it was time for our rehearsal game. We were led into the studio, shown how to write our names with a light pen, and taught how to use the buzzer. That's a little bit tricky because you have to wait until Alex is reading the last syllable of the clue, or you get locked out for several seconds and somebody else gets in. I did okay in my half-game rehearsal game, and I was feeling pretty confident. But then there was a lot of waiting around. As I said, they tape an entire week at a time, and they pull out the names at random literally from a hat as to who's going to play each game. Though they do make a point of getting the out-of-towners on, and they try to avoid having two people with the same first name. Not a real problem for me on an episode. I sat through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, dinner break, and Thursday. It was about 6:30 p.m. and I was actually kind of hoping to be held over to the next week because I was tired at that point, but startlingly my name was called for the Friday show. I managed not to trip on the carpet while getting up to the podium, and I don't think too many people would notice how firmly I was holding the podium to keep my legs from shaking. Finally, I did succeed eventually in buzzing in, and I was so startled at that even though I knew the correct answer, I said something wrong. My really good categories tend to be things like geography, Broadway musicals, and science. Instead, I had rock and roll groups, Shakespeare trivia, ballet, vice presidents, sports, and Mr. in the dictionary. But eventually I was getting the hang of things, and at the first commercial break, I was only at -800. They make you turn around during the commercials in case something accidentally gets revealed on the board, and the contestant coordinators get up there talking enthusiastically about showing lots and lots of energy and making sure that you're still enthusiastic and reassuring you it's still early and anything can happen. The rest of the first round went pretty well, and I was positive, although still in third place, at the end of the round. The second round went much better, even though I still didn't like any of the categories. But I had some good luck on the $1,000 answers and hit both daily doubles. And one of them, on the category of flowers, the clue was, this African lily is also known as the lily of this river. The only thing I could think of was lily of the valley, but fortunately, just in time it hit me, Africa River, and I said, what is the Nile, which was correct. I was on a roll, and I actually finished the round in first place. Now, for Final Jeopardy, they actually stopped the taping, so you have time to calculate what you want to wager. When you wonder about all those people who win by exactly $1, they give you paper and pencil to figure it out. The category was the Old Testament. I gave myself a 50-50 chance. I mean, I do, after all, have a biblical name. But when the clue came up, it said he left his home in Tarshish when he left his home when he heard the Spirit of the Lord and went to Tarshish. I wrote down who was because I wanted to make sure I left things in the form of a question, and my mind was completely blank. By the way, that music lowers your IQ by at least 30 to 50 points. Finally, in desperation, I scribbled down Abraham and put down the light pen. Well, it turned out that the answer was Jonah, and both of the other contestants knew it. So I ended up losing. So it wasn't quite like my childhood fantasy. For one thing, it was Los Angeles, not New York. It was Alex Trebek, not Art Fleming. And instead of winning several hundreds of dollars, I came away with 3 Armatron watches, a pair of sneakers, $25 worth of light bulbs, and yes, a lifetime supply of Lee press-on nails. But despite not quite being my fantasy. Whenever I go back to my hometown, almost everybody I run into still says, you know, I really remember that time that you were on Jeopardy.